What is Reigns, Her Majesty, and Reigns Game of Thrones? What's the gameplay like? What's the narrative like? How do these games fit into the world of fandom? The first Reigns game was released in August 2016. Reigns, Her Majesty was released in December 2017. The Reigns series is developed by Neural and published by Devolver Digital. In the case of Reigns Game of Thrones, it was developed by Neural in partnership with HBO and was released in October 2018. Reigns Game of Thrones is based on characters in the Game of Thrones franchise. Gameplay. The Reigns games are very simplistic to play. The player is presented with a series of unpredictable requests and remarks from people around them. They must respond not with their idealisms, but in order to keep the church, the people, the army, and the treasury from going too high or too low, and therefore murdering them and ending their reign. Online editorial on Rhizo magazine talks about Reigns, Her Majesty. A player advances through the game by unlocking new sets of cards, reaching personal milestones, and both acquiring and upgrading magical objects. Social dynamics and narrative design. Lee Alexander was the sole narrative designer for Reigns, Her Majesty and assisted the narrative design process in Reigns Game of Thrones. Lee Alexander likes to explore the dystopian side of life in a creative writing, having written things like her novella, Monitor, which follows the lives of 3 would-be activists in the not-too-distant future and is about the loss of privacy to do with the advances of technology. When one thinks of a narrative, one thinks of a story. In a world like that created in Reigns, Her Majesty, there is more than one person, and that means social interaction. These people have individual and shared histories, and the governmental system all help to modify or inform those social interactions. As far as definitions go, there are a lot of games that fall into this broad category. Cue the narrative designer's job, make these characters interact with each other and their world in a meaningful and entertaining way. In the context of gaming, this can be put in the character of social dynamics, the second core element of game design. Lee Alexander also spoke to online newspaper Forbes about Reigns, Her Majesty. I wrote not only the words, but the experience of the words, what happens as a result of different decisions, etc. Writing in a game like this is an interesting challenge because each card has only a few lines of text, but those few lines really need to give the player a lot of information in order to make their choice feel interesting and risky, as well as help them try to predict possible outcomes. They also need to give characters to the person speaking. I had to pay constant attention to how the words would be experienced. I had to learn how to use the tools, how to actually code in the behavior of the cards, how they should be weighted and so forth, so that the player will encounter them in the intended way. The Reigns system, there's very little about it that's linear. It's not even so much a story as it is a modular collection of moments that, strung together, create the tale of a queen's reign and untimely death. What Reigns, Her Majesty really is in essence, one single choice after another. When coming to the narrative design of Reigns Game of Thrones, we are to consider both HBO, the fandom of the TV series, and G.R.R. Martin, the writer of the original books.
It's nothing.
He's choking!
Calm the poor boy. Idiots, help your king!
Interconnectivity. Where do fans exist that fans can hang out together? This can be sorted through by checking the most common landing grounds. Conventions, they still exist. Twitter exists. Tumblr is alive. Facebook, it doesn't exist. Reddit, that exists. Twitch usually exists. Fanfiction, if it doesn't exist, it's because you haven't written it yet. Fandom Wikipedias exist if awaiting verified details. And then there's memes, which are shards of information passed on from one iteration to the next. It started in deep history with things like how to start a campfire, make furniture, clean your cooking utensils, and it ends with things like this. And then there's YouTube and more generally Google. So let's break down a few key mechanics on the way preferences, fanatical or not, impact your viewing experience currently in YouTube. So if you click on a gameplay video, you start getting ads for games. But if you click on a gameplay video for Reigns Game of Thrones, you might get this specific ad. The modern internet connects based on word association. If you're a fan of this, you might like that ad better than, oh, say, the latest sale on health and beauty products at your local chemist. And you may prefer this next video we found better than, oh, say, a video on carpet shampooing techniques.
But the good part is that I discovered that there's an enormous synchronicity here, because my readership started to build from people coming in from other avenues saying, I'd never heard of your series, but I played the role-playing game, and I loved the role-playing game. I thought I'd better look up the books, or, I collected miniature figures and paint them, and I saw your figures that Dark Sword was doing, and I decided I'd better look up the books. So I was getting new readers from all of these things.
Much like the figurines inspiring a book purchase, the Reigns series of games is utilizing that word association tool to interconnect through the Reigns Game of Thrones game in the series. If you like Game of Thrones, you may like this game, and if you like this game, maybe you want to check out others in the game series. Or, you're not a fan of it, and you move on.
Nobody ruined your childhood. The Teen Titans you liked is still on DVD.
In conclusion, Reigns, Her Majesty, and Reigns Game of Thrones are part of a series of Tinder-style games set in medieval times. The gameplay is to swipe left or right and therefore affect the 4 stats pools. You're dead when one of these gets too high or too low. The narrative of the games is built up on a series of questions which are drawn in no particular order. The Reigns games, while not terribly popular in of themselves, relate to fandoms and gather more followers by interconnecting with the Games of Thrones and medieval fandoms.